Chapter 6 Economic Realities. The Economics of Duality. By the time you read this book, it will already be quite evident that your financial structure is collapsing. No, it will not happen all at once. There are a lot of built-in safeguards to prevent that. But no matter how much rhetoric is bandied about, the expression, "the emperor has no clothes on," applies quite well to your situation. As we have stated previously, your economic system is not only out of balance with the energies of the ascending Earth, but its principles are almost diametrically opposed to the paradigms of the new Earth. The new fourth-density human beings are concerned for the welfare of all citizens. The opposite of this is having a small, elite group who live high on the hog while everyone else lives under control and manipulation. Read slavery. The belief in the haves and have-nots stems from identifying with the material world and forgetting your spiritual nature. As materialistic souls witness the laws of entropy that rule the lower worlds, they become fearful that they, too, will wither and die, becoming powerless in the face of nature. Therefore, out of this deep sense of powerlessness, they erect all sorts of fanciful structures in order to have some sense of control. The egos of the Dark Ones sincerely believe they are the chosen people, and deserve special status. Their attitudes toward others may vary from having pity and a false sense of compassion toward the downtrodden, to feelings of outright disgust and disdain for the lower class. Understanding the illusions suffered by the so-called elite will help you, the lightworkers, have true love and compassion for these deluded souls. The systems of the lower worlds were not designed to last forever. They are the scratch pads of creation, a temporary playground for gods in training, similar to a movie set. Once production is finished, the movie set is taken down. Once soul lessons are learned, there is no longer a need for a stage, or costumes, where players can act out the oppressor or oppressed, victim or victimizer, good guy or bad guy, etc. As the soul lessons change, new sets are constructed appropriate to the learning environment required. In the case of the more violent outer worlds, perhaps they remain long enough to entertain new groups of young souls who wish to go through the ordeals of war, poverty, misery, suffering and the like. Such worlds will be receiving the warmongers who leave Earth during the galactic shift. Of course, the lower worlds also contain a great deal of beauty, and that is certainly an inherent part of the soul lessons of many, to recognize not only the outer beauty but the beauty within. So for a time, the world plays host to souls who are learning love and compassion, as well as those who are suffering from identification with the ego. A central soul lesson on Earth is that you can create heaven or hell, depending on the state of your individual and collective consciousness. The root cause of control and oppression. Identification with the mortal third-density self inevitably breeds attachment to the ego, because the ego is synonymous with identification and attachment to materiality, specifically, within the entropic worlds of the lower four dimensions. The ego is a self-construct designed specifically to overcome the soul's perception of powerlessness and helplessness in the face of unknown dangers lurking within an uncaring, hostile universe. This feeling of littleness stems from the original cause issues the soul took on when descending into the lower worlds, a topic we have visited repeatedly. The experience of physicality, starting with the birth process, was so intense that the soul forgot he was connected to an all-powerful source. The ego became an ally of the intellectual mind, the part of the self that continually tries to explain the how and why of creation. The intellect, being aligned with the science of the lower worlds, cannot perceive the higher realms, and so all it sees is a brief period of life followed by an inevitable death. Unable to see the eternal nature of the soul, the ego lives in constant fear of the body's death, and hence, its own end. Being attached to materiality, one becomes addicted to acquiring more and more stuff. You even have a slogan, "The one with the most toys wins." Your self-worth becomes tied up in your net worth. Instead of seeing money as simply a medium of exchange, something to make the trading of goods and services more convenient and efficient, money becomes a symbol of power and status. Even those of you who think you have evolved beyond this idea probably still have some etheric imprints from past lifetimes regarding the haves and have-nots. After all, most of you have lived like a pauper and a king, to quote the lyrics of one of your popular songs. So deep within the recesses of the subconscious mind, materiality still has control in most people of Earth. The problem with renunciation of materiality. Religions have gone too far in the opposite direction, branding materiality to be evil and urging humanity to suppress its desires for wealth, pleasure and comfort. Some of you have had many lifetimes in a monastery, convent, or temple where you renounced everything and became the ascetic. While this may have had some temporary value in helping extricate you from your attachment to materiality, most likely the materialistic part of you was simply suppressed, locked down and out of sight from the conscious mind. A few enlightened souls have managed to free themselves from the ego's sense of deprivation and loss that usually accompanies renunciation, but the vast majority of souls have simply pushed their desires underground. Most of you are caught between trying to attain material wealth and trying to resist it. This brings to mind another of your favorite expressions, "What you resist persists." Until you completely love and accept all aspects of yourselves, there will be an internal battle between the part of you that wants material comforts and the part that feels it should do without them because of their perceived corruptible nature. Or you rationalize that you are beyond the need for material wealth, and then curse the world when it reflects back to you an inner perception of lack. You might try to be a good and charitable person. The key word here is trying. Anytime you try to be something, it means that you either believe you cannot obtain it and are somehow vainly attempting to have what you cannot, or you are failing to accept yourself as you are. Charity comes about naturally when there is true love and compassion in your heart. It does not need to be cultivated or preserved. Of course, you will need to look at the places where you are holding on to what you have out of a fear of losing it, but you also need to see if your giving is genuine and coming out of a consciousness of overflowing abundance, or whether you are trying to prove something to yourselves or others. So how does a soul move out of this seesaw between worldliness and otherworldliness? How do you deal with the insatiable ego self that always wants more? More stuff, more enlightenment, always more, more, more. You can start by simply having awareness of the needy little me, to quote one teacher. Simply observe how this little self tries to overcome its own perceived shortcomings by painting pictures of who it thinks you are, or should be. Just watch the way it weaves illusions out of the deeper feeling of emptiness that drives it insane. A great way of overcoming the attachment to materiality is by appreciating and being grateful for what you already have. Money is neutral. It takes on the meaning you assign to it. If you truly believe you are wealthy, it matters not the size of your bank account, for you will always have everything you truly need. You can create great beauty in and around you simply by feeling gratitude. Creating beauty, prosperity and harmony around you is normal and natural. It is part of your beingness. You do not have to try and create beauty. You just naturally let it express itself, perhaps through art, music, writing, teaching, or whatever moves you. The idea that you must battle to overcome entropy, mortality, and death implies that there is a formidable force to be overcome, subdued and destroyed. You have, therefore, created a split between you and the thing to be overcome. Of course, the only thing that truly needs to be overcome is the attachment to overcoming, and for that, pure awareness must come into being. Becoming aware of all the ways you are attached to materiality, without judging, condemning or avoiding it, is the key. We are not going to go through a long list of the consequences of becoming attached to materiality. You can see that by looking at the world. Rather, our aim is to teach you that you are vast, creative, spiritual beings, and that you do not need to rely on outer authorities of any kind whatsoever in order to create the kind of world your souls wish to experience. To sum up, there is ultimately nothing wrong with materiality. It is the identification with and attachment to it that is the problem. We have said this before and we will likely say it again. Now that we have taken a brief look at the causes of the disparities existing in the world between the haves and have-nots, let us make a few predictions about your economic future. The collapse of the Western nations. The Western economy is collapsing, not because anyone is being punished by God, or because any of you are bad or wrong. None of you need suffer as a result of the collapse of the old world. In fact, it is a cause for rejoicing because it affords you the opportunity to create a new earth economy based on true spiritual principles. The more attached you are to the present system, the harder it will be for you to embrace the new earth because you will be mourning the loss of the things you are attached to, such as bank accounts, houses, cars, expensive clothes, and the illusion of power and control that these things seem to offer you. Things, in and of themselves, are neutral. They take on the attributes of those that use them. A perfect example is physical energy. It can be used to create or destroy, depending on the consciousness that is using it. Being in gratitude for what you have, and learning how to make do with less materially, are great qualities to embrace. This is not the same as sacrifice, because you are not really giving up something of great and lasting value in order to have peace of mind. You are merely giving up your attachment to the outer world. The things of this world can be useful tools for fulfilling your mission and purpose for being here. We are in no way implying that you must do without basic necessities. In fact, as you realize that you are inwardly prosperous beyond measure, then you become a wise steward, or vehicle, for the use of the tools of materiality. As Lord Sananda once said, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God and all things shall be added unto thee." This means having your priorities straight. You are here to help awaken humanity and bring them into the new earth. Whatever outer levels of materiality you need to accomplish this purpose will be given you by your own soul in collaboration with your spirit guides, ascended masters and the Godhead. You might not understand how you come to acquire what you need, but you do acquire it. You will be guided as to what you truly need and what you need to let go of. The Western economy is collapsing because it has become grossly out of balance with the emerging new earth. This is a wonderful thing, but it will not seem wonderful to those who still believe their happiness comes from their income, bank account or credit card. It will seem like cruel and unusual punishment to those who have invested their whole lives in a system that is based on power and control rather than love and cooperation. Specifics of the collapse. You are probably aware that the economies of the Western world are based on what is commonly called fiat currency, or legal tender, money printed and given an arbitrary value by a central bank. If traders agree to the arbitrary value, then the currency keeps the economy afloat, in theory. However, due to compound interest and fractional reserve banking, schemes set up to enrich the banking elite at the expense of the working class, the system eventually implodes due to runaway debt induced by these schemes. The problem is not loans in general, but the way they are structured. If someone with money were to loan it to someone else with the expectation of getting repaid, and charged a small fee for the service, such as simple interest of 10%, there would be no problem. Mr. Jones would borrow $1,000 and at the end of a period of time, pay back $1,100. Or, to put it in current real estate figures, he buys a house for $200,000 and pays back $220,000. That's doable for a lot of people. But with compound interest, the longer Mr. Jones waits to pay back his loan, the more interest he accrues. After 10 to 15 years, the interest on his $200,000 debt becomes almost as much as the original debt, meaning that very shortly he will owe $400,000 on his original loan, less his payments already made. Compound interest applies to countries, as well as people and institutions. Many countries currently owe money to other countries that will never be paid back due to the cascading effect of compound interest. But wait, it gets worse. Now let us introduce fractional reserve banking. This means that banks are allowed to loan money based on a tiny fraction of what they have received from depositors, and borrowers who are repaying their loans. So let's say that Mr. Jones puts $10,000 in a savings account. If the bank is given a 10% fractional reserve base, that means it can make loans up to $100,000 based on the $10,000 it has in hard assets. Where does this money come from? In essence, it is created on a computer ledger or, to put it more bluntly, it comes out of thin air. Effectively, this introduces more money into circulation, which might seem like a good thing, except that no real service has been provided with this money, other than perhaps hiring an accountant to keep track of it all. Sure, it fulfills a temporary purpose, allowing someone else to borrow even more, which in turn can be fractionalized again into an even larger sum of money, which can then be lent out yet again. If you perceive that this is like some sort of pyramid scheme, you are absolutely right. Theoretically, you could keep on printing money forever, as long as you have ink to run the printing presses, but a curious thing happens. The amount of services that have real value eventually become far less than the amount of money in circulation, thus creating inflation, a situation where a given amount of money, over time, buys less and less products and services that have real value. Real wealth consists of products and services that have tangible value, such as food, clothing, durable goods, etc. It also includes services, such as teaching people a skill, counseling, and the arts, music, poetry, prose, etc. In an economy that has runaway inflation, you will inevitably also have runaway debt, as the interest continues to accrue and more money must be paid back, and that is what has been happening in the Western world the past few decades. This combination of debt and inflation means a lowering of the standard of living for more and more people over time, while the bankers and a few shrewd investors get richer. Eventually, the value of the currency can no longer be propped up by those who want to keep the system going, and it comes crashing down in one of two scenarios: 1. Hyperinflation, or 2. Depression. In hyperinflation, money keeps getting printed to cover the mounting debts owed to a central bank, such as the Federal Reserve Bank of the United States, or the Bank of England. The country that owes money keeps printing more to satisfy the debt, thus devaluing the currency. This devaluation occurs because there is now more currency in circulation without any additional products and services of real value being added. In an economic depression, controls are implemented to limit the amount of currency being printed, thus drying up the money supply. In such a scenario, businesses and individuals can no longer borrow money and therefore are unable to invest in new products and services, which in turn cause massive layoffs of employees and a high unemployment rate. At the present time, the Western countries, USA and UK especially, have over $20 trillion, £17 trillion, in outstanding debt. The EU is facing a similar situation, and several countries within the European cartel are on the verge of dropping out of the system and starting their own currencies. At the time of this writing, Greece and Italy were essentially insolvent and were relying on assistance from the EU and other banking authorities. Many people in those countries are urging their governments to default on their payment to the EU and to print independent currencies. In addition to mounting debt caused by compound interest and fractional reserve banking, many countries have speculative investments, called by various names, including derivatives, options, etc. The value, on paper, of these securities amounted to over $600 trillion, £450 trillion, as of mid-2015. If only 10% of the investors were to call their trades, cash in on their investments, all at once, the system would bankrupt quickly, since $60 trillion is more than the combined gross domestic product of the developing world. No banks have actual cash on hand anywhere near that amount, due to the fractional reserve system. We are not going to give you a detailed lesson in economics, but we wanted to point out a few principles of the decaying present system to show you why it is dying. The real reason, once again, is that it is not based on the principles of a fourth density Earth, and that is the current vibration of Earth as she moves through the portals. The law of attraction implies that the enlightened souls who inherit the Earth will create, or attract, an enlightened economic system, one that serves everyone and not just the elite bankers. You can do your part by visualizing and knowing that you live in an abundant, unlimited free universe that truly has your own best interests at heart, despite what the present system has taught you. The collapse of the Eastern economy. The Eastern world, and primarily China, has a role to play in the dissolution of the Old World economy and emergence of an enlightened New World. In some ways, the economies of the East and West are similar, but in other ways they are quite different. The manufacturing process, which used to exist primarily in the West, has been transferred to the East. This is due to many factors, including cheaper labor and a stronger work ethic in the East, but it creates an interesting scenario, because the Eastern countries, being manufacturing centers, depend on the Western countries to purchase their products. When the Western countries go bankrupt, as they are now doing, they will no longer have the money necessary to continue purchasing the goods manufactured by the Eastern countries. Thus, the manufacturing plants will begin closing due to lack of demand, sending millions of workers home. This is particularly devastating in the East, where the work ethic is so strong. Currencies of the Eastern countries are closely tied to the currencies of the Western world. If the East were to divorce itself from the West and divest itself of Western currencies, this would exacerbate the problem by sharply devaluing the currencies of the West and thus throwing the Western countries into more severe hyperinflation, or deeper depression, depending on how the Western governments and banks respond to the crisis, thus drying up the demand for Eastern goods even more. Timetable for the collapse. Due to free will, it is difficult to predict exactly when certain economic events will occur. Many souls are continuously clinging to the old system, and to a limited extent, this draws out the process of change, pushing back the anticipated ending dates of the present economy. The portal shifts are acting as major catalysts here. It is our understanding that the American and European currencies will likely decline dramatically between 2017 and 2030, resulting in severe hyperinflation or depression, depending on how the central banks respond to the deepening crisis. At the same time, the value of real goods, including gold, silver and agricultural commodities, will rise significantly. Real estate was hyperinflated for many years due to speculation. In 2006 the bubble burst and it declined for many years. Then it went back up. Now, another bubble is about to burst in a similar way. We anticipate that real estate will continue to drop periodically and then stabilize and eventually climb, since land and buildings are real assets. However, it is likely that by the time it appreciates significantly in value, housing and land will only be available to those who have gold, silver and precious metals as collateral. A few wealthy individuals may be able to pay cash for their real estate, using inflated currency, but the vast majority will need to rely on bank loans, which will simply be unavailable. It is recommended that you prepare for the collapse by prioritizing your investments as follows. 1. Buy land and grow your own food while you still can. 2. Buy gold, silver and other precious metals. Have the metal on hand in a safe place. 3. Keep cash on hand rather than deposited in the bank. 4. Keep liquid assets, such as checking accounts and credit, debit cards. And finally, 5. Invest in forward-thinking companies that have excellent management and are contributing to the well-being of the world, such as alternative energy and environmental cleanup companies. Remember, this is in order of priority. If you only have enough money for some of these, make sure items 1 and 2 are handled first. Solutions offered by the power elite. Most of the bankers and extremely wealthy individuals are not stupid. They know they cannot keep their pyramid scheme going forever. Sooner or later they will run out of resources to buy and sell, or the debt will become so burdensome that their customers, borrowers, will be unable to pay back their loans. Therefore, they are already dreaming up new ways of retaining their illusion of power. One of their favorite tactics is to introduce new currencies that are shared by several countries in a geographical area. The euro is an example of this strategy. The idea is to have more control over more countries by enacting a central bank to handle the new currency, thus replacing the individual banks of the member countries. A similar strategy is planned for North America, with a new currency called the Amaro. This currency would replace the Canadian and United States dollars, and the Mexican peso. A central North American bank would be created to manage these assets, and of course, print them out of thin air. The elite will likely attempt to convince the people that creating a common currency would unite them and make it easier to travel. While this would be true on one level, it would not be the primary motivation for having a regional currency. The real reason would be to dissolve trade barriers and make it easier to corner the market on various commodities. A new trade agreement called the North American Union, NAU, that goes well beyond the boundaries of NAFTA, would be drafted to go along with the Amaro. There is already a free trade area of the Americas, FTAA, in its infancy stages. One of the benefits to the elite of such a structure would be that this dissolving of boundaries between countries would normalize wages, making them considerably lower for Canada and the USA, while raising them a little for Mexico. The end result would be cheaper labor and greater profits for the global corporations as well as the banking cartels. Note: at the time of this writing, a nationalist president had been elected in the USA. This person's intentions are to stop these free trade agreements and bring jobs back from overseas. This might, in theory, slow down the collapse of the economy, but it will not prevent it. Enlightened solutions to the collapse of the economy. In a perfect world, the solution would be to eliminate all the jobs that do not produce a product or service of real value, such as most of the activities of Wall Street, and replace them with companies and organizations that are making the world a better place, such as groups tasked to clean up the environment or distribute food to the hungry. The idea here is to get everyone to contribute to the well-being of everyone else. However, this does not just happen as if by magic, particularly when people are attached to power, prestige and the illusion of security. The solution is not some sort of socialistic utopia where everyone has the same assets and opportunities. True, the have-nots must be given the means of ending their poverty and suffering, but it is not as simple as just giving them money or jobs. There must be a fundamental change in consciousness among all groups of souls on Earth. As long as souls are identifying with the ego, body, mind, personality complex, there will be a perception of lack and the resulting hoarding and greed that go along with that perception. As consciousness shifts, so do the priorities of the society. Instead of spending endless billions on military defenses and bailouts to bankers, the focus would be on education and the empowerment of the people. That includes taking care of planet Earth and restoring her to health. We are talking about real education, not just memorization of those facts that the elite want you to know, at the exclusion of the facts that are less convenient to the agendas of those in power. Real education attempts to answer questions such as, what does it mean to be a human being? And, what is enlightenment? And, how do we create a society where all souls are valued and respected? We in the heavens have worked with countless planets such as yours, and while every one of them is different and unique, there are a few common denominators that are worth mentioning. First, let's give a little praise. As one of your teachers recently said, never in the history of this galaxy has a planet that has fallen so far been lifted to a higher frequency so quickly. Your planet is one of the most interesting, and challenging, of the worlds we have worked with. That said, those worlds that have placed education at the top of the priority list are the ones that have awakened most easily and quickly. Although young souls desire to learn about suffering in all its many forms, older souls have learned all they need to about misery and poverty and they are ready to move on. It is rare for a planet to accommodate both old and young souls at the same time, and it presents very unique challenges. Without transferring the younger souls to a planet more suited to their level of evolution, it would be next to impossible to bring humanity up to the next level. Mother Earth, in her nearly infinite patience, has reached the point where her very survival is threatened, and for that reason she has been working with the Godhead to arrive at a solution that ultimately serves all souls. A time will come on Earth when the enlightened souls who remain with her will no longer require any kind of formal economy. However, there needs to be a transition period, so the following sections are devoted toward the exploration of various new economic paradigms. Some of these will be implemented before the existing old world system has completely crumbled. A few so-called solutions are already being offered by the souls that brought you the problems to begin with. Although these solutions are irrelevant because their instigators will soon be gone from the Earth, we have included them below in order to provide contrast. Let us start with some of the more popular ideas for either fixing the existing economy or creating a new economy. This is not an exhaustive list, and we encourage you to come up with new ideas of your own. Precious metals and bringing back the gold standard. This is a temporary fix only and, if not done properly, will serve to prolong the old world economy rather than help humanity make the transition into enlightenment. Nevertheless, it can alleviate some suffering and will help redistribute economic power back to the people and away from the banking cartels. Precious metals, gold, silver, platinum, etc., do have some real value as industrial components, and as art and jewelry. By tying paper currency to precious metals, this gives it a base value or benchmark. Such a system is more stable than fiat-based money creation. Governments would be required to hold hard assets, precious metals, in their storehouses to back up the value of their printed money. They would issue gold and silver certificates, representing gold and silver and being exchangeable for actual metal upon request. In other words, everybody would agree that gold and silver would have the actual value, and that the paper certificates would simply represent gold and silver, making trading much easier. Gold and silver are very heavy and hard to carry around. Abolishment of the fractional reserve and compound interest banking systems. The souls that believe themselves to be in power, and those that give them that power, would never willingly agree to abolish the fractional reserve system or compound interest. But hand in hand with bringing back the gold standard, such a move would quickly restore balance. The idea is as follows. Banks could lend money, at simple interest not to exceed 10% of the principal amount, and must have 100% of their assets on the books at all times. In other words, if you deposit $1,000, the bank holds that money in gold or silver certificates, until you make a withdrawal. Loans must be made out of the original principal investment of the bank. If the bank borrows money from another lender, the same rules apply to that transaction and the other lender. No exceptions. So if someone creates a bank with $100,000, he can choose to make 10 $10,000 loans with that money, thereby collecting $110,000 in payments, at 10% simple interest. He can then re-loan that money, which is then worth $121,000 in payments, 10% of $110,000. The bank is free to offer interest to depositors at a rate less than the loan rate. That's how the bank makes money. So if 10 depositors get a 5% return, the bank's profit is 5% if the loan rate is 10%. It's pretty simple. This system would put a lot of accountants out of work. So now the soul who started the above bank has made $10,500, half of the $21,000 made on loans was paid to depositors. That's a nice little salary for the small inconvenience of filling out some paperwork and cutting some checks. Land, real estate. Land is the most valuable commodity on Earth, because if the land is in the right place, you can grow food on it and collect water as well. Land is worth more than gold and silver because you can eat the food grown on the land, and you cannot eat gold and silver. If you have the means to buy land that has fertile soil and fresh water, now is the time to do so. We recommend that you buy a parcel that has both open space and forest. If you do not have any forest, then set aside up to half of your land to plant trees. The other half of your land should include fruit trees, a vegetable garden and, or course, dwellings for living and working. You will want to set up your homestead and workplace as close together as possible to minimize the use of transportation devices that burn fossil fuels. As long as you have satellite technology and the internet, it is recommended that you do as much of your business as possible online so that you do not need to travel to and from work every day. Eventually, this will be irrelevant because you will develop new transportation methods using electromagnetic propulsion devices, but for now, you are looking for ways of reducing your carbon footprint, and being less subject to the extreme fluctuations expected in the energy markets in the years to come. The energy to run your homestead, or intentional community as the case may be, should be from hydro, solar and/or wind power, so you will want to select a location that has, hopefully, at least 2 of these in abundance. A desert location will have sun and wind. A mountain location will have water and wind. We will have more to say about buying land in our section on intentional communities. Let us now take a look at the idea of creating new currencies at the grassroots level, meaning within individual communities and local groups. New currencies. The purpose of money is to make the trading of goods and services more convenient. That's all, folks. There's really nothing more to it than that. Instead of hauling a truckload of apples to exchange for a truckload of oranges, when you get tired of eating apples, all you need is a piece of paper, or coins. That way, you can wait until the oranges get ripe, usually 3 months after the apples do, and redeem your paper, or coins, at that time. Both farmers will like that, because the apples will not go rotten waiting for the oranges to get ripe, and the orange farmer will not have to pick his oranges while they are green. This may seem like an absurd example, but that's really the purpose of money. You humans have given it far more importance than it actually has. You tie your self-worth to it. You live in constant fear of being without it. You hire millions of people to count it, insure it, store it, trade it, invest it, etc. A tremendous percentage of your energy as a species goes into spending, saving, investing and protecting your money. All new currencies need to be based on the one principle given above, to make life easier. Such currencies should be based solely on the real value of products or services offered. We realize some things are not easily assigned a value, and that is why extensive council meetings will be required by those towns, villages, provinces and countries who wish to introduce new currencies. For example, you might determine that someone who bakes bread has a lower net worth than someone who builds a house. In the beginning of the new currency, there will be unavoidable inequities. Some professions are currently overpriced to the extreme, such as medical and legal. Others are grossly undervalued, such as teachers. There will be various interpretations as to what constitutes real value. After all, one counselor may help her clients tremendously, while another does not. Should they both charge and receive the same amount? The law of supply and demand will partially correct this imbalance, if it is allowed to run its course without interference. For example, the counselor who is very effective will have a lot of clients willing to trade their currency for her services, while the one who is not effective will have very little business. There are some currencies already in operation in various cities around the world. Some of them consider all work to have the same value, so an hour of legal consultation is worth the same as an hour of teaching about how to bake bread. At the time of this second edition, digital currencies were beginning to be recognized as valid means of exchange. We will not discuss digital currencies at this time. As souls evolve, the real value of goods and services will be recognized and rewarded amiably. In order to help bring everyone into an enlightened state, certain services should be provided free of charge, including basic health and education. Rather than impose income or property taxes, a city or province and its citizens could agree to donate a certain percentage of their earnings to health and academic educators on a regular basis. Although this would, in essence, accomplish the same thing as taxes, and could be construed as a voluntary tax, without compound interest, virtually all of the money raised in this manner would go to actually funding education, rather than the majority of it going to pay the interest on the principal amount of a loan. We recommend you do some research and visit one of the cities using alternative currency to see how it is working and the challenges involved. A word about secession. In some countries, states or provinces have a constitutional right to secede from the central government. The biggest challenge in doing this is generating enough labor and resources to be self-sufficient. The citizens of many developed countries are heavily dependent on their governments for welfare, social programs, interstate commerce, etc., and in order for a region, state or province to secede, this dependency must cease. In countries composed of states or provinces, and even in countries with just a few counties or shires, it may be possible to introduce currencies and trade programs that apply just to those regions. The idea here is not to exclude anyone or become isolationist, but to focus on growing, producing and manufacturing goods locally. This is, in a way, an extension of the ideas put forth in the upcoming chapter on intentional communities. If you want to describe the three parallel Earths in terms of economics, you could say that the fourth density souls are seceding from the third density world and are setting up a new society with new currencies and trade practices that support their value system. The fifth-density souls will have little need for economics since almost all their needs are provided internally. We have included a few additional ideas about your future economies. Enlightened economics. As long as fourth-density souls on Earth require basic resources, there will be some need for an economic system. It could be simply trade and barter, as it was in many times past, or it could be a sophisticated system of currencies and accounting, as it is today, or perhaps somewhere in between. The fundamental difference between an enlightened economy and one that is based on greed, lack, scarcity and selfishness, is that the primary and most important goal of an enlightened economy is the well-being of its entire citizenry. Unlike socialistic systems where the value of individuality is squelched, and unlike capitalistic systems where the value of the corporation becomes more important than its members, an enlightened system is based on intelligent, wise decisions usually made by a council of elected elders who have demonstrated a great deal of knowledge of economic matters, i.e., what people truly need to be prosperous and happy in the outer world. An enlightened economy begins within, by recognizing that all souls live in an infinitely abundant universe that is based on love and cooperation. It has been scientifically proven that there is an almost infinite amount of energy in the vacuum of space, which is really anything but a vacuum, so in essence, an enlightened economy is simply an outer expression of an inner truth, the truth that you are free, unlimited and very prosperous. The first tasks of the new economy are to 1. Educate people about the prosperous nature of the universe, and 2. Develop ways of harnessing this abundant energy and making it tangible and productive in the everyday lives of souls on Earth. We have observed that if the money spent bailing out your banks and supporting your militaries were instead spent on the two items listed above, within a few short years you would have programs in place to ensure that all human beings are living happily and abundantly, with no physical lack whatsoever. Even with your existing technology, you have the means of taking care of everyone many times over, yet because of economic and political iniquities, and the belief in lack and scarcity, almost two-thirds of the world is malnourished or starving. As the fourth-density communities of light become more established, many of our groups in the higher realms will be able to interact with you and share our advanced technologies and science. Many ET groups would love to do this now, but the situation on Earth is far too unstable to permit this without upsetting the balance of free will. In an enlightened economy, everyone contributes according to those avenues of expression that most satisfy the inner yearning of each soul. In other words, a successful society makes education top priority, and within that educational process, encourages souls to discover their true meaning and purpose in life. If every soul were to contribute and work in jobs that were truly fulfilling, an amazing thing would result. There would be a perfect balance of skills, talents and professions. You would not have 1,000,000 Reiki healers and no psychotherapists, or 1,000,000 hairdressers and no electricians. Every need would be filled because every soul would see the bigger picture and how he or she fits into it. The God presence of each soul would show him the most joyful and creative ways to express and contribute to the needs of the community at large. In other words, each soul would see the oneness between himself and the whole and respond accordingly. Just as honeybees, ants and other creatures work together to create magnificent structures within their world, so do enlightened humans, but with one important distinction: humans are not colonies of workers. They are creative individuals working to simultaneously fulfill the needs of self and the community. When a member of an enlightened economic system falls on hard times, for whatever reason, the community becomes a support system to help that individual get back on his feet. Each member recognizes the oneness that exists spiritually within the group, and so in a sense, if one person is unfulfilled, the whole group is unfulfilled. Your visionary Gandhi said, "As long as one child is starving in the world somewhere, we are not free." In summary, an enlightened economy is based on the premise that there is more than enough for everyone, and focuses on the science of harnessing, producing and distributing the prosperity and abundance that is already present within the etheric realms. We in the higher realms long ago learned how to tap the etheric realms to revitalize and regenerate the lower worlds. While we cannot give you every detail of the process whereby this is accomplished, or this book would be too large and specialized, we can point you in the right direction and communicate with your inventors and scientists to the extent they will listen to us. As we stated previously, advances made in science and technology between 2017 and 2030 will allow electromagnetic energy devices, often called zero-point or free energy systems, to begin proliferating on Earth. This will essentially prove that there is more than enough for everyone. Such systems will cause the old third-density economic system to complete its collapse so that the economic phoenix of the new Earth can rise from the ashes.